Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. You can join us whenever you can subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, Good Pods. Always rate and review us, and all of that helps. And I know we've been doing fairly decently with Good Pods rankings as far as film podcasts, so I appreciate everybody listening over there. But if you go to the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel, you also get quick take reviews of films like Empire of Light. My review for Elvis is there, as well as other films that I might cover at film festivals. I'm not doing Sundance this year, in part because I've got way too much going on, but I do have a couple of film festivals I definitely plan on attending, and you'll see more quick takes from me from those film festivals in the future. You can also check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. They're the kind of the cornerstone of the Patreon right now is leaving the collection, and what that is a series that I started last year where I look at a movie from my film collection and I give it one last spin, and I do a quick review, basically explaining why I originally got the film, and why I feel like its time has passed in my collection. That's at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. If you follow the podcast, you will notice that we only did one episode of the Established Classic series last year, and part of that was scheduling on my part. It just got way too hectic at the end of the year, but that being said, I did want to start 2023 with the Established Classic series. For those of you who may not remember, my guest and I look at three films from Hollywood's golden age, which I'm basically doing from the 30s to 1960, and we look at three films from that era, and we basically give them quick little reviews of our personal affection for them, and kind of discuss whether they are still part of that canon. And I think one of the things I like about this set of three that we're going to be doing today in particular is that one of them is one that is definitely going to be one that you recognize immediately as an all-time classic. But the other two, they don't quite have the same reputation, at least in the public consciousness, as much as they do with film fans. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to choose those two films in addition to the third one. Join me, as he always has on the Established Classic series, is an actor who we have talked to many times about many different types of films, including his own, is Timothy J. Cox. Tim, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be back.
It is. It's been a while. I think it's that last Established Classics was the last time we really had a chance to talk.
Yeah.
What have you had going on recently?
Let's see. It has been nice to be able to get back to work. I have a horror film that's called Protonopia, which I work on with my frequent collaborator Matthew Mailer. That's hopefully coming out in the next couple of months. Another feature film that I worked on here in Ohio called The Dirty People, that is also going to be coming out in 2023. And a short film called Ready Cash, where I play a cult leader that's set to come out the next couple of months. So a lot of things coming out, but also like the typical life of an actor, it's just auditions.
Yeah. And I know especially that re-collaboration with you with Matthew Mailer. I know I've reviewed a couple of films that you've been in from him, and he's a filmmaker I really enjoy watching. So I'll be really excited to see that one from you, and I do promise we'll have more short films from Tim coming up on the website as far as reviews. But today we are talking about classic films, and like I said, the three films chosen today, I chose because one of them I haven't actually seen in a while. One is one of those true all-time classics, much like Casablanca, much like Citizen Kane that we talked about. And then another one is, I do think it's a classic, but one that is not as familiar to people outside of film fans, but I think it kind of should be, and it's really kind of interesting the way it still speaks to modern day, even though it was made in the 50s. But we're going to start off with probably the lightest of the bunch, and that is 1941's Sullivan's Travels, directed by Preston Sturges, starring Joel McCrea and Veronica Lake. And Tim, when was your first experience watching this movie?
Probably about 25 years ago. I watched the film on AMC when it was still known as American Movie Classics, when Bob Dorian was the host. I had heard that it was a classic. I, of course, had seen The Lady Eve and The Great McGinty, and knew of Preston Sturges, but knew that this was the one that was kind of regarded as his masterpiece. Although it was not, I think it was only a moderate success when it came out, but in the years since, it has been regarded like, I think it's George Clooney's favorite movie, and you could kind of see when a satire about the film industry. You think of movies that like The Player may have sprung from this, or even anything that Christopher Guest has done. I mean, like all kinds of movies that kind of not necessarily poke fun at Hollywood, but kind of put Hollywood, I guess, make them have to answer the big questions about life before stepping out and making a movie.
Yeah. And it's funny because of the fact that, you brought up AMC, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure this is where that or TCM are where I first watched the film off of recording it off of one of those two channels. But yeah, it's hard to remember a time when AMC really did mean American Movie Classics. It wasn't just known as the channel of The Walking Dead. And Turner Classic Movies basically took over that Classic Movies channel, and I think they do a fantastic job curating it, but certainly AMC at that time in the 90s definitely did that well as also. I think this one first came into mind for me around the 90s. I mean, part of it was the initial AFI Gray's Films list, because it was one of the films that was not on the list that a lot of people thought should have been. But also, you mentioned George Clooney. I think one of this movie's big claim to fame is there's a line in this movie that kind of inspired one of George Clooney's collaborations with the Coen brothers, and that is, of course, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah.
And that one, of course, goes on a completely different tangent in adapting Homer's Odyssey. And it's a movie that I think, especially for Coen Brothers fans, I mean, it was certainly a commercial success, but wasn't, if you ask a lot of Coen Brothers fans, I think they might put it like a bit lower on their list with them. But at the same time, I think it kind of gets to the heart of what McCrea's director is trying to do, and in a weird way, in the way it approaches it.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes this movie so wonderful is that one, Joel McCrea is an actor who was primarily known for westerns, and this was probably the best part that he ever had, and it really showed like an incredible, a lighter side to him. And the thing about the movie is that 1941, it still feels fresh. Like watching it again, it felt like that this could happen. Like this movie could come out today, and audiences would like it. That it could be like an Alexander Payne film, or the Coen brothers, or Noah Baumbach could do something, could have like that, and have that kind of story where it could still resonate with audiences. And that's really the mark of a great film. I was actually trying to find when it was exactly this film kind of started being regarded. And I didn't find that it was not on the AFI list, which was maddening. And as a matter of fact, it's not on a couple of those like long lists, which you look at the comments and you'll see Sullivan's Travels mentioned in there a couple of times. So It has resonated and still does resonate with an audience, which again, that's the mark of a true classic.
Well, and it's one of those movies that really is, you can understand why it might resonate more with filmmakers than it does with audiences, because of the fact that it is, in its own way, it's about Hollywood. But one of the things that I like about it is that it really is really kind of cynical about Hollywood, because of the fact that it approaches, Joel McCrea's filmmaker, he wants to make a socially conscious film that really speaks to the common person living through the Great Depression at the time. Mm-hmm. And, he doesn't recognize the value of the films he makes, which are predominantly comedies, to the average person. He thinks, they want to see people. They want to see movies about them. They want to see movies
about suffering. Yeah.
But, one of my favorite lines of dialogue in this movie, which honestly it gets to the heart of the movie, is that he basically takes this crazy idea of, okay, so I'm going to go to the wardrobe department. I'm going to basically dress like a hobo. And I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to have like 10 cents to my name, and I'm going to go on the road and see what the common person does, and
to gain that life experience. Yeah.
And I love I love that his servant, his butler, is somebody who he's trying to talk him out of it, because he's like, they don't necessarily want you to what you have to offer. They don't want what they don't.
They're not buying what you're selling. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he has misadventures when he tries to go out on the road. And one of my favorite moments is when you see the bus behind him of all the reporters and stuff like that, all the reporters and producers and all that. It's like you can tell just how quickly this is going to go off the rails. And then he finds himself back in Hollywood at one point, and he says, "It's a funny thing how everything keeps shoving me back to Hollywood." And that's basically the thesis of the entire movie, where he basically, everything that he does to try to connect with common people who are going to see his movies, what he needs to realize is that there's a reason people connect with his movies.
Yeah, the escapism.
Yeah, and it gets to that whole idea that people don't necessarily want to see serious movies about serious subjects. They want to see movies that take them away from their problems for 2.5 hours or 2 hours. And I think it's a really beautiful love letter to movies and the power of movies, even the lighter ones. And I think that's one of the things that Sturges does so well in this film.
Well, and it's something that Sturges did in all of his films. He always snuck in, like, the one thing that all of his characters in all of his films is that they're always on a journey for self-discovery. And I think that is like, when we go to the movies, we go to see, a movie that and a good movie like will surprise you. I'm like, wow, I'm like that. I'm like that guy. Oh, I relate to that. And it's like he brings it back to, hinting to the audience that the movies and what you're going through are really not that different. Like it's all the same stories and all the same problems. And, especially during that time, we of course were in World War I, and, so, and things were, changing within the country. And Sturges just had that whimsical, way of like, just pointing to the audience that like, I don't know, like, just keep the faith. I think that's the thing. It's like, and of course, watch, for Joel McCrea's character, he grows. And I think hopefully it will make him a better filmmaker, but also I think it's made him a more well-rounded person, which is kind of like the one thing that, I always say, when you're an actor, it's important, to young actors when they're starting out, it's important to have as well-rounded a life as possible, because that, of course, will help. Yeah. In characters and in, no matter what kind of characters you play. So this journey for Joel McCrea character, it makes him a better person and it makes him a better director, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think anybody in the arts, I mean, certainly, I understand certainly where you're coming, what you're talking about when it comes to being an actor, how you building off of your personal experiences as far as building characters. I mean, even watching movies and critically analyzing movies, I think is having some personal experiences is definitely important. I think to understanding the value of movies. I mean, even and not just the ones that are serious about serious subjects, but also the ones that approach life in a lighter way. I think it's like watching something like, say, Ticket to Paradise earlier this with the Julia Roberts, George Clooney romantic comedy. It's like, if you haven't had that experience as a loved one of somebody who's getting married, or as somebody who's trying to get married, you are going to there's probably something about that film that you're going to connect with. There's something about those
relatability, yeah.
And even something like say Empire of Light, the Sam Mendes film, which I mean, I'm not a huge fan of, but I do recognize that there's parts of me in that movie that really connects with what those characters are going through, because I've lived that life in movie theater. I've worked at movie theaters, and it's like I understand that feeling that they get.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a movie like Sullivan's Travels is why it was just a reminder of why I love the movies, because it kind of puts a mirror up to Hollywood in a very satirical, fun, and still very, relevant way. I mean, it would be kind of fun if this were remade. I mean, like, but in modern day, like with social media and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it would be an interesting attack. I mean, when I was watching the movie, I often wonder, I says, God, what would Preston Sturges make of, like, the modern world, like politics and things like that? I mean, he'd have a lot of material to work with, that's for sure.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with Sturges as I probably should be. I mean, I've heard of some of his other movies. I just haven't really gotten into them. But yeah, I mean, I know I don't remember when I first saw this movie. It was at least 20 years ago, I think. But this is just a delightful one, and it's one that you do kind of are kind of curious as to how you could do it now, but also it's one of those movies where I'm not sure if you could because of social media. Because obviously, if you want to, social media is so ubiquitous that like nobody's not going to recognize him. Like at at the time, there aren't as many Hollywood filmmakers who are going to be obviously remember what they look like. And I think that's part of why he feels like he could get away with it. But I love, I forgot how much of a delight Veronica Lake is in this movie. She plays she plays somebody who came to Hollywood wanting to be an actress and is kind of on the way out. She wants to be out of there. So she ends up going with McRae when he tries to restart his experiment. And I love when they first get out there, you know, one of the thing, you know, they kind of turn off like actual hobos riding the rails, you know, with their uncertainty of what to do, and they're trying to interact with them. And then there's somebody who calls them amateurs, and I just couldn't help but laugh at that because of the fact that like, people can read them right away.
And it's kind of like, you know, you when that line is said, it's like, you know, the audience, it's like, oh, you know, Joe, you're in for a ride, because I think he thinks that like this is just going to be an easy kind of thing. That like, okay, I'm just going to get out there and discover, you know, like I'm just basically going on for information. But you know, while on this journey, he discovers his humanity, and I think that that's important, because it's like, you know, he sees how, you know, the other half lives, and how, you know, how it's tough, and that you know, while wanting to make a kind of a socially conscious film, maybe he comes to the realization that these people need, at the time, Chaplin and, you know, Preston Sturges and those kinds of movies, like the escapism, and that's the escapism of movies, whether it's a comedy or Hitchcock, a mystery, or, you know, or anything like that. I mean, it's the beautiful thing about, you know, again, why we go to the movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that, you know, this movie, like, you know, you mentioned some movies that poke fun of Hollywood, that satirize Hollywood. I think the one that this one kind of reminds me of, is, at least as far as modern day, is State and Maine. And I mean, like Joel McRae's character feels very much akin to the Philip Seymour Hoffman character in that movie, where it's like they're wanting to do something pure, they're wanting to do something authentic, but it's like at the same time they kind of have to be shown to realize there's more, you know, what you're doing, you're not supposed to be doing reality. There's always going to be a certain amount of escapism that goes into filmmaking, and so unless you're making a documentary, you're not going to be doing something wholly authentic, and people don't want that. And I love that you have the moment where he's, you know, it's like he's at near the end, and it's the one part that I'm not sure really works, is the part where he gets amnesia and they think that he's dead. Now that part I think is very funny, but he ends up in a chain gang, and he ends up working in a prison. He ends up, and he works, and he goes to a movie night, and he sees the impact on the audience, the people who he's trying to get to know, of the escapist movies that Hollywood has to offer. And it's I'm not sure if the amnesia thing works completely, but for that part alone, you know, the way he gets back to being himself is like, that's kind of a bit loopy, but honestly, it's the part where you have to kind of give way to the fact that it's a movie. You know, there's not really going to be an elegant, serious way of going through this. You have to kind of do something silly in order to bring something like that out.
And maybe that's Sturges' intention. I've always wondered if, like, you know, with that if that was Sturges' intention, like, you know, in the writing and the directing of the piece. But now it's one that anyone who hasn't seen it or seen any of his films, like The Great McGinty or The Lady Eve or Christmas in July, which actually I think he did all of those movies I think he did these 4 movies. I don't know if he did them all around the same year, but like, because he just churned them out.
I was looking at his credits, and I was shocked that he really did not have that long of a career.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at how much he did do in a span of like 20 years, and it's let's see, looking at, yeah, I mean, basically from 1940 to 1955 was his career. And he started out with The Great McGinty, Christmas in July, The Lady Eve, and Sullivan's Travels. And then his output became a little bit less regular. But at the same time, I mean, from the 40s and 50s, like, he was the vast majority of his films, and he only did one movie in 1950 and one movie in 1955, and that's basically it. But and he didn't even start writing until, well, no, he did write, he did more writing than they did directing, but yeah, I mean, you see him as a director in this, and I know Sullivan's Travels is where did I see this on Criterion Channel? I think I might have seen this on Criterion Channel or HBO Max, but I know it is available on in the Criterion collection if you want to pick it up. It's really just a delightful film.
It really is.
It's a wonderful cast that he put together for this movie, and if you're a fan of movies about making movies, this is definitely a really good one. And I like that it's a movie about making movies that never gets to the making of the movie, and I really kind of enjoy that. But it's still about filmmaking, and it's still about what drives filmmakers to want to make movies. But yeah, it's absolutely a delight. I just really loved revisiting it, and it's definitely worth checking out. Mm-hmm. So we are going to continue with easily the most well-known film of these three. It is one of the 2 truly all-time classic films from Elia Kazan. It is the Oscar winner for Best Picture, and it stars Marlon Brando, Carl Madden, Lee J. Cobb, Eva Marie Saint, and Rod Steiger. It is On the Waterfront. And I mean, this is, you've no doubt, chances are you've seen clips of the I Could Have Been a Contender scene between Brando and Steiger in this film, or you might have seen clips of Brando and Eva Marie Saint. This is a film that is acknowledged for its greatness, but it's also somewhat of a controversial film in the sense that Kazan made it as a response to those who criticized him for naming names to the HUAC committee during the McCarthy era. And he was very upfront about it the entire time. I mean, if you're an Oscar watcher of the past 30 years, I mean, no doubt one of the memories you probably have is when Elia Kazan got an honorary Oscar, and you had as many people not clapping for him in the auditorium as were clapping for him. Mm-hmm. And it's like this is a movie of tremendous power and profundity, I think, when it comes to the complicated nature of right and wrong in life. I mean, this is a film about unions and corruption, and Terry Malloy, Brando's character, is a character who he finds himself basically on the docks, and he's basically he had dreams of being a prize fighter, but he basically kind of had to give those up at a certain point, and he's basically a dock worker. And one day he is asked to talk to a coworker of his and convince a coworker of his to go talk to people who work for the union boss Johnny Friendly, played by Lee J. Cobb, and the friend is murdered, and it turns out they were the brother of Eva Marie Saint's character. And the film basically goes through the concept of conscience and whether Terry Malloy will do the right thing and rat on the corrupt nature of L.J. Cobb's character, or whether he'll stay, just somebody who witnesses what's going on without saying anything and just not wanting to rock the boat. And it's just every time you watch this movie, it's just such a tremendous film to watch.
Well, and this is a movie that, like, actors always kind of reference as like one of the actors' movies. I mean, not just for Brando, but for Carl Malden and Lee J. Cobb and Rod Steiger and Eva Marie Saint, and and I mean, as far as an American movie, this might be one of the most perfect. Because it's so perfectly acted, perfectly written. Bud Schulberg, based on a series of articles about, crimes on the docks that was written in 1948. That there were like you were saying, like a series of corruptions and mob goings on, and and it still packs a punch. From 1954, and it still packs a punch, just like the stories, because it's just like you said, crisis of conscience. This is a guy who he had a shot to be someone, and he blew it. And this is like another chance, a rite of passage, another chance for him to do it. And he knows that not only is his life in danger, but Eva Marie Saint's character's life, his brother Rod Steiger, who's kind of Johnny Friendly's, consigliere, I guess you could say. His life is, but then the Carl Malden character, he's like the conscience, the tough love conscience, and it's just there's not a false note in this film, and. As kind of like a companion piece to this, if any of our listeners ever get a chance, if you ever get a chance to read or see, oh God, I just blanked on the Arthur Miller play, A View from the Bridge. Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge. At around the same time, Arthur Miller was doing research on the play, and he was, about the crime on the docks, and his play takes a different attack on it, but it's a wonderful companion piece because both pieces deal in the same era and in the same, of course, with immigration and all of that, and just with the crimes that were going on down there. It's really compelling. I should mention, years ago, the Carl Malden character, Father Barry, is based on a real priest named Father John Coughlin. Well, I actually played Father John Coughlin on like a television reenactment thing, and it was on A&E, and it was really fun to read about the real guy. In the movie, like Carl Malden was like played kind of like not a gentle, kind priest. He was like a guy that was ready to scrap. Yeah. Well, the real guy was 10 times more scrappier than that. He would get into fist fights, and Carl Malden I think the Father John was actually on set when they were filming. So Carl Malden had him as a reference, which was great to have. But it's just interesting. Whenever I come back to this film and to these characters, I always think of that and how much fun, how fascinating it was to read about that period and about all of that of what happened.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm glad that you have that. I'm glad that you have that insight that you can share, because it's been about 9-10 years, I think, since I'd seen this last. It's been a while, but it's one of those movies that when I do agree with you to a large extent when that this is very much a perfect film in a lot of ways. And I had forgotten how critical to the film Carl Malden's character is, Father Barry. And I love how much, because you're right, he's somebody who Father Barry's etched as somebody he's not going to just try to be what we typically think of as a noble priest who really is going to try to pick away at Terry's conscience to get him to do the right thing. He's somebody who he could beat the crap out of Terry Malloy if he wanted to. He
gets a shot in.
Yeah,
Carl Malden gets a shot in there, and he's kind of like a priest, but also I think in another life he would have been a cop.
Yeah,
and I think because but it's kind of like he said, the docks are my church, and he calls everybody out, and he's willing to put his life on the line. I mean, and that's the beautiful thing about this movie is that every character in the film, you see the moment where you really see who they are. I mean, Rod Steiger, of course. I mean, in the cab scene, everybody talks about Brando, and Brando was brilliant, but Rod Steiger, he gives just as good. I mean, because he is willing. I mean, I don't want to spoil, but he's willing to make a drastic decision to, in many ways, save himself. But he knows that he knows that he can't do it. And of course, and Lee J. Cobb, I can watch Lee J. Cobb. I mean, that's the thing is every one of these performances, it's all an acting school. And then Martin Balsam, I think it's one of his first movies. He pops in there really, really briefly. Fred Gwynne is there. Fred Gwynne pops up. I think he's one of Johnny Friendly's, hoods, I guess you could say. I mean, you'd always pick out Fred Gwynne because he's probably the tallest.
Yeah,
but
this movie. That's one of the things that is so extraordinary about this film is that this could have very easily been a simple morality tale where it's like corruption is bad, and it does have that point, but also sees why. You also see why people might be afraid to stand up to corruption. Yeah. And you kind of understand it. Even if you wouldn't necessarily make that choice for yourself, you understand why somebody who's needing a living wage for whatever reason might do that. And you're right about Charlie's choices after in that taxi cab because of the fact that he has a choice he has to make. It's like, is he going to let his brother take the fall knowing that's what's going to happen, or is he going to make a sacrifice to show his brother why he matters so much to him?
They both have a chance, what the cab scene shows is that they both have an opportunity to be human beings. Yeah. I mean, and it's, again, like Sullivan's Travels, this is very much a movie of self-discovery as well. I mean, and the thing is, for Terry Malloy, it may have taken that, the love of Edie, the Eva Marie Saint character, who's I think she was 18. I think she was 19 when
this
and Eva Marie.
This was
Eva Marie Singh, 98 years old, still kicking.
And this was her first role too. And I mean,
won the Academy Award, and I mean this. It's and this was for Brando. This was Brando at the height of his. He had those first couple of years when he did The Men and Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, Julius Caesar, this film, of course. And where he all of those performances are just extraordinary. I mean, they are acting schools. I mean, and then, after around 1957, and when Mutiny on the Bounty, when he stopped working with Kazan, I don't think Brando was ever really the same as an actor, because Kazan had his number. Kazan had a lot of actors' numbers. I mean, Gregory Peck told a really interesting story about when they worked together on Gentleman's Agreement. Gregory Peck kind of resisted, because Elia Kazan as a director would get close to you and ask you about your personal, feelings and life and stuff like that. And apparently on the making of that film, Gregory Peck was very resistant to that.
Yeah.
30 odd years later, Gregory Peck, he had rewatched Gentleman's Agreement again, and he then realized what Kazan was trying to do, and he realized that he thought that there were some things that was missing in his performance, that maybe if he had listened to Kazan, maybe there are things that could have been brought out. And it's like, that's the kind of, Kazan was I guess the first of what you would call an actor's director in the tradition of, directors who followed, like Sidney Lumet or Mike Nichols or Martin Scorsese or, many, many others. But Kazan was probably, because he and any actor who ever worked with him, whether it be Natalie Wood or Warren Beatty, Brando, of course, they always hailed him as he had your number.
Yeah,
he had a way of digging inside and getting something from you that you may not have thought that you were capable of delivering. Now, as far as the controversy around it naming names and things like that, I really. I don't know. I don't know what kind of pressure he was up against. At that time. Sadly, he went to his grave with just a lot of. You always just have a lot of questions, but you try to put into perspective and understand what they may have been going through, because I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Oh no, and especially the way that the climate of the time, as the Cold War is getting started, communism has always been a bad word in American life, and that's one of the worst things you can be called in American politics, is a communist. And it's one of those things where it's like, did he make the right choice? That's certainly up to him to decide. That really is. Really, none of us can judge that for ourselves. We just hope to make the best decision for ourselves in situations like that. And one of the things that's so, it's funny, you compared, you talked about it in comparison to Sullivan's Travels as being a film of self-discovery, which it certainly is for Terry Malloy, but it's also, in a way, it's also kind of the type, in a way, it feels like the type of film that Joel McCrea's character in Sullivan's Travels wants to make.
That's true. Wow, that's honest, funny. Yeah.
Honest, authentic, but at the same time, you can tell the Hollywood flourishes, the filmmaking flourishes are there, but this movie does feel authentic, and that's a big part of Kazan's approach with the actors and how natural he was able to get those performances out of those actors. This doesn't nobody feels like they're overdoing it in this movie. Everybody is
No.
calibrated just right to where we can believe that these characters are people who would exist in real life.
Well, and at the end of the film, without giving anything away, one of the things that I always wonder, I always wonder at the end, how long is it going to be until somebody gets Terry? Because he won today.
Yeah.
But, Johnny Friendly, he's a big, and, when it comes to money, I mean, he may have won the day, but I don't think he wins the war.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that maybe even if something does happen to him, maybe he's given the other people an opportunity to stand up.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the score by Leonard Bernstein, which I completely forget how tremendous it is. It's funny because of the fact that I've listened to Bernstein a lot, and I even performed Bernstein in high school for part of our marching show, not from On the Waterfront, but from West Side Story and from some of his other works. But the thing that's interesting about Bernstein's score for this is, you listen to a score for this, and it definitely gets to the heart of this film and what this film is about, the corruption, but also the underdog spirit of this film. But you can also hear echoes of things like Jerry Goldsmith will explore later in movies like Chinatown and LA Confidential. And you can hear that echo of this score in those scores. And it's really, it's one where Bernstein did not work a lot in film, but when he did work in film, it was something special.
Mm-hmm. No, it really does, and it adds so much. Like that's the thing is, I mean, the film is it's put together like it's just stitched together so wonderfully, and every piece just it's just a perfect movie. It's a perfect one of the most perfect American movies ever made.
Yeah.
And if it was the only film Brando had ever done in his life, it would still be considered, I think, top 10 of the greatest film performances ever. And, and all of them, Rod Steiger, Lee J. Cobb, and Eva Marie Saint, and all of them are, they're all up there with him. And of course, at Kazan at the helm. And of course, the gem of a script by Bud Schulberg.
Yeah, the script is, I forgot how economical the movie is. I forgot it was under 2 hours. You would think with a story like this, you would think, it's got to be at least over 2 hours. No, it's not even an hour 50. But now, it's so much is packed within that amount of time. It doesn't stop moving, and it doesn't stop throwing you curveballs in the way that it shows this evolution of Terry.
Yeah, it really is, and like just because he's kind of, he's kind of like tough guy, but like very childlike. Yeah. Where you see, and the thing that Brando, the vulnerability, and I think Edie brings that out in him, the vulnerability, and that like opens him up and makes him more of a well-rounded person. And of course, also, the tough guy who adores, the pigeons.
Yeah.
Like all of there is a gentleness to him, a gentleness that was always there, but he hides it from Charlie and from Johnny. And it's because it's in that world with those, you don't show vulnerability, because if you show vulnerability, that means that there's a good chance that you're probably going to rat.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, it's funny because of the fact that we've talked a lot about Brando, and if you're only familiar with his later work from like The Godfather on, like you will no doubt know a lot of the stories about him having just extraordinary, just absolutely extraordinary demands on getting filmmakers to do what he wants to do for the privilege to work with him. But the fact of the matter is, it's like, even if you look at something like Don Corleone in The Godfather, like that sense of vulnerability is still there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even through all of the actors' tricks that he does in that movie, even something like Kurtz, which is as menacing a character as anybody's ever put on screen, you can understand. You can see the sympathy in his character. You can see the sympathy in his Jor-El in Superman, and it's just really kind of extraordinary how even when he stopped being the matinee idol of like the 50s and this period, he never stopped being a great actor. He was always a great actor.
Yeah, he the facility, the instrument was what his instrument was extraordinary. I mean, Anthony Quinn said, I admire Marlon's talent, but I don't admire what it takes for him to, the emotional pain. The wonderful book, I think it's Conversations with My Mother. You really get a sense of, and there's a wonderful documentary called, I think, Listen to Me, Marlon, that gives you a really glimpse into, who Brando was. Because of course there's always the myth and the stories. He, in interviews, he was an interesting interview because he liked to deflect and keep you on your toes. He would, but the work, you can't deny that in this performance and many, it's why people always say whenever there's a discussion of who's the greatest actor of all time, his name is usually at the top of the list.
Yeah, and you can definitely understand it. I mean, especially if you take away the baggage of Brando as a personality and just look at the work, and you just see that he created indelible performances through to the end, and he was always committed to the craft, even if it takes him in places that completely go overboard, like in even something like as dreadful as The Island of Dr. Moreau. Like it's you can still feel the energy coming off of his performance.
Oh, I think he's having the best time because it's a strange movie and a strange performance, but I think it looks like he's having the time of his life.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's, the thing is to be on, people would always describe him on set, they have video of him on Superman and just people watching how he would prepare and how he would do everything. And it's just, no, he's extraordinary, but I don't know if he's a nut that I think, he passed away, almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And the fact that our people are still trying to, dissect the man, connecting with the man and the actor. They'll be talking about him, for 100 years after we're gone. So, and that's the thing that makes him extraordinary.
So we are going to close this set of three with a film that I had actually never seen before, but I had heard about. It is 1957 Sweet Smell of Success from director Alexander Mackendrick. It stars Burt Lancaster as J.J. Hunsaker, who is a Broadway columnist who uses the power of the pen to basically make or break careers. But one of the things that is interesting about this film is that Hunsaker is certainly the character that we leave thinking the most about, but the movie is told through the perspective of Sidney Falco, who's a press agent played by Tony Curtis. And he is dealing with a situation that Hunsaker wants him to try deal with in terms of breaking up the relationship between Susan Hunsaker and a jazz guitarist. And it feels like it's basically just sport for JJ in a large way, because especially since the jazz guitarist seems to be an up-and-coming star, wouldn't JJ want to promote that type of relationship? For him, it's all about the power. And I love that this film is taking the ideas of noir and this style of film noir and putting it in a world of publicists and musicians and columnists, because it's giving us a seedy side to celebrity culture in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Lancaster, the character of J.J. Hunsaker is based on, not even loosely based on Walter Winchell. It just come right out and say, this guy's like Walter Winchell. And, he could, or Walter Winchell, or, guys like, oh God, who's the one that Citizen Kane was based on?
William Randolph Hearst.
Thank you. People who had the power in those days to destroy, whether you were successful or up and coming, the power to destroy with just a word. And they took a delight in it. And the thing about this movie is that I don't think Burt Lancaster was originally going to act in it. He, in his company, Hecht Lancaster, they produced the film, and the studio wanted Lancaster to play the part because, of course, he was a big star. I think actually who originally Lancaster wanted to play the part was Robert Vaughn. And Robert Vaughn wasn't, I think he had gone into the armed services at the time, but that would have been interesting because Robert Vaughn, fantastic actor, not a bankable name, but he would have, that would have been a really menacing term. But Lancaster, I think this is one of his best performances because he is icy cold. There's none of that. Burt Lancaster was a very athletic, very big bravado. And this is just a very quiet, menacing, and he's terrifying.
Yeah.
And just, and a man not to be messed with. And my favorite line in the movie when he turns to Tony Curtis and says, "Cigarette me, Sidney." And it's just like he knows that Sidney Falco will do anything to be on his good side. And Tony Curtis, equally also, I think also one of his best film performances.
And like even when you said, it was one of his first ones. It was one of his first ones, and he's tremendous. And it's like,
he's tremendous.
You see him. It's funny because obviously, like most people, I know Tony Curtis best from Some Like It Hot, and he's wonderful in that movie. But you also see one of the things that's interesting about Sidney in this. He's the one who really has the journey, the self-discovery. The journey of self-discovering this is that how much is he finally going to take from JJ before he cracks, and that's really
how much is he willing to go to please him. I mean, it's like it's almost like he is where his journey is going. It's kind of like the beginnings of where Charlie on the waterfront. Like he's in the beginnings of Sidney. You're still a human being, but if you go through with this, you're just you don't have a soul really, or it's kind of like you're no better than Hunsaker. Mm-hmm. And I know that the film was not a success when it came out, and Lancaster was not happy. The script was actually written by the playwright Clifford Odets, and I think when the film came out, I think Lancaster heaped all of the blame on Clifford Odets, but it's a fantastic script. But this movie it's ahead of its time, and maybe that's why it didn't do great when it came out in 1957, because it really lays on the cynicism, like anything, with, that kind of, with journalism in that world. And I mean, this is one, I mean, they made a Broadway musical of it in the early 2000s. So the story still spoke volumes. I think it was 2002, and it was John Lithgow who played the Hunsaker part. But so it still resonates. But I think maybe around the 1990s, this movie started, getting like I don't know if cult status, but then it started to be regarded as the classic that I think it deserves to be considered.
Yeah, and I know I first became familiar with it in because Scorsese talks about it in Personal Journey with Martin Scorsese Through American Movies. He talks about this film for a bit when he's talking about iconic classic filmmakers, and this is one that I definitely think fits within that vein because of the fact that it doesn't. It's interesting to see how it takes film noir, and it's something as seedy as Detour, but also has the same polish of something like we'll see later in like Chinatown and LA Confidential.
Oh, yeah.
The way stylistically it does, as is phenomenal cinematography by James Wong Howe, who won an Oscar for this film, and the music by Elmer Bernstein.
Elmer Bernstein got it.
Is tremendous. Like when I was watching this, I couldn't help but wonder whether Orson Welles might have been inspired by this bit when he came to making Touch of Evil, because this film kind of deals with a lot of the same thematic ideas of Touch of Evil, even in a completely different perspective, in the ways that people are having to make choices as to how corrupt are you going to let society make you before you finally decide that you've had enough. And
yeah,
you think about Wells, you think about the character Menzies in Touch of Evil is kind of on that journey in that movie where it's like he loves Quinlan, but at a certain point he has to make a decision as to whether he's going to let Quinlan ruin any more lives or not.
Well, and the thing about movies like this and Touch of Evil and even Sunset Boulevard is that they're a gamble, because they're movies that do not have they're certainly not happy movies, but they really are, I guess, accurate. Like they're true. Like if you're going to a movie to escape from the real world, these are probably not the kinds of movies that you want to go to, because a movie like this would probably scare you, because it's like, my God, there's J.J. Hunsekers out there. I mean, today, my God, there are J.J. Hunsekers everywhere.
Oh, this is one that could easily be remade and redone for the modern era, because of the fact that we see it all the time. And I mean, there's so many more people who are more volatile than J.J. Hunsaker, who don't even have, who are so far gone in their sense of consciousness that there's no getting through to them. They just will destroy anything and anyone who gets in their way, regardless.
Well, it's no, so like the TMZ. I mean, like none of them have. But then again, I wouldn't call them. I mean, it's an interesting question. I actually think J.J. Hunsaker is a legitimate journalist. I wouldn't call any of the words I can't say.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call any of them legitimate journalists. They're just bottom feeders. I think J.J. Hunsaker, there may have been a time where he's a legit journalist, and the way that because that it equals dollar signs. Mm-hmm. And it equals, he's got a byline on his, he gets, and that's what pays the bills for him. But
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you definitely do feel like Hunsaker's definitely somebody who feels like like you said, and I do agree with that, that he was a legitimate journalist, but he's also somebody who came to realize at a certain point that my words carry weight.
Yeah.
And when you realize that moment and you realize, well, I can make or break careers, and you kind of start to decide you would rather break people's lives than make them, that's where he's at. And you know, it's one of those baffling questions where it's like, why would
It's kind of like, who hurt you?
well why
Who
why
hurt you
well,
enough
and the
that
thing is, it's like that's one of the things I love, that this is ultimately a story about JJ crossing a bridge that he shouldn't be crossing by deciding that his sister's happiness is not important to him in his happiness.
or having that control over her.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Hunsaker, it's control. He controls. He's the puppet master, and
Yeah.
it's there's that wonderful line in Wall Street, like when Charlie Sheen asks, like, why wreck things? Because it's wreckable. Because there's a little bit of joy, I think, that Hunsaker gets from doing that. It's like the kingmaker, like I get to decide who lives, who dies, or career wise or otherwise. I mean, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty, and that's what. And he does it. He's kind of like a crime boss in that way. And I think Lancaster. I mean, you could have easily. Burt Lancaster was known in his career for kind of overdoing it from time to time. Here he didn't, and I think he just found the right notes, just the right rhythms for this character, and it works. It really, really, really works.
Yeah, it's absolutely a tremendous performance, and it's funny because of the fact that maybe it's probably because of the initials, but I couldn't help but think that maybe Stanley and Jack Kirby, when they were creating J. Jonah Jameson for Spider-Man, were probably inspired by Hunsaker, because he very much has that same personality of like, look, I don't care if you're doing good, you're clearly doing something bad. I'm going to expose you and I'm going to get rid of you.
That sounds on point that they would do that. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's amazing that, like, you think of a movie that came out in 1957 that audiences really didn't know what to do with. I mean, even I remember in Tony Curtis's book, like he said this, when this movie failed at the box office, he said it was one of the heartbreaks of his career, because he thought that this was the film that was going to get him an Oscar and all that.
And he's fantastic in the movie too. Like
he really is.
We spent a lot of time talking about Lancaster, but yeah, Curtis is terrific in this film.
Well, and for him, his character is kind of like we were saying. It's like he still has an opportunity.
Yeah.
Like he wants to be at the level of where Hunsaker is, and I remember watching the movie again. Like you just like, you just kind of wonder. It's like, God, do you really think it's that good? Like being there, like better to create than destroy. And it's just like, but that's the climate, that's the business, because that's what sells. It's the old line: if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, like, nobody wants to hear
news
stories about good things happening, only the bad stuff.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I know this one's on Tubi, so if you and it's on the, like, all three of these are part of the Criterion Collection, so feel free. I know that's how I watched Sweet Smell of Success. I blind bought the Criterion like last.
That's a dangerous channel. That's a dangerous channel.
And I just am so glad I did, because it's a tremendous movie. But yeah, all three of these movies are absolutely worth watching, and I love that one of the reasons why I wanted to do at least Sweet Smell of Success and Sullivan's Travels is because, yeah, film fans will have seen these or at least heard of these and know the reputation. On the Waterfront, most people have heard of and know as an absolutely great film. But I love that Sullivan's Travels and Sweet Smell of Success have had this rejuvenation of their reputations over the years, and to where you can look at them along the same lines of an On the Waterfront in terms of how they approach their subjects and why they are great in their own respects. And that's one of the
they
things.
go all the way. Yeah, they don't shy away from the subject matter, which is you think about, like, for the time, like, it may have been a taboo in some respect, but they go all the way.
And this is the other reason why I wanted to do this series, because of the fact that not only do I want to obviously talk about films that are canonized, unassailable classics that I love, but I also wanted to talk about some of these other films that might just be underneath the surface for people who are not film fans, but watch these and see why they've gotten that stature the same way of it On the Waterfront and a Citizen Kane or Treasure of Sierra Madre or Sunset Boulevard, and to show that the reason these movies have gotten that reputation is because of the fact that they were made by filmmakers who understood what they were doing when they made them, and they made them to endure. And I mean, I think all three of these are just as fresh and just as interesting to watch as they were when they came out. And sometimes
absolutely.
even more so to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Sweet Smell of Success is a movie that, like, I suppose it could be remade, but I don't know if it would be done with the same style and panache. And I mean, like, we have, imagine like a Harvey Levin, like J.J. Hunsaker. No one would go see the movie, it's like, no, I mean, I had not seen Sweet Smell of Success. Again, I probably hadn't seen it in 25 years. And, but it's one that always, I did a play about 20 years ago where I played a cynical reporter, and I got myself a pair of J.J. Hunsaker glasses, and like, and it's weird, like, you got the suit and like the glasses, like something happened. And it's like, when a great performance really, inspires you like that. But I always think of fondly of Lancaster and this, and Tony Curtis, and Martin Milner, who I believe just passed away in the last year. But no, it's a really, really extraordinary film.
Yeah, it is. Well, we've come to the end of this episode of Established Classics, and it's always, Tim, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I know I want to do at least one more of this series this year, and then I know we've also talked about a filmmaker whom I know both you and I greatly admire, John Frankenheimer. I definitely want to do that conversation again this year, because I've been excited ever since we started talking about that possibility.
He's an underrated director, and talk about movies that stand the test of time, that God, Manchurian Candidate or 7 Days in May or Seconds alone. I mean, just we can go hours on John Frankenheimer.
Yeah, and I cannot wait to do so with you. Tim, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Always a pleasure.
I'd like to thank Timothy J. Cox for joining me on the podcast. As always, it's always a lot of fun to talk movies with him, and I love that we've leaned into talking about classic movies with him because of the fact that I think as an actor, I think he has a lot to offer about what makes some of these classic movies so influential. and so great. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this series with him. That's going to be it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you very much for everybody who listens, regardless of where you listen, whether it's Good Pods, Apple, Google, or Spotify, or the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. Thank you to everybody who subscribes at the Patreon. And once again, thank you very much for everybody who reads at www.sonic-cinema.com.